Great talk. Over here.
Oh, thanks.
I don't know if I missed this from the last part of your talk. So the song and fly circuit do not have any interaction. I was wondering if that is not the case, if there are particular notes that are inhibited when one behavior
for sure
hits on. Yeah, curious about VPR9, for example. Right?
Yeah. So I simplified it in a sense. So there's definitely interactions, and I can shut song down with a number of neurons, but there's like no interconnectivity with the song circuit. So it seems to be, there's ways to shut each thing down, but I don't think there's any or very little activity from flight neurons that help produce song and vice versa. It's only, I think, mainly to oppose each other. Yeah.
Maybe my question is similar. I was wondering, when you silence the neurons, generally that reduces song.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there's not any kind of like inhibition of song within the VNC, or if maybe some of those neurons at the end or between the flight and the song would be inhibitory.
Right, so you would expect-
Of the behavior, I guess.
Yeah, like the idea would be that maybe if you inhibited some flight promoting neurons, you would get increases in song or something like that. Maybe, is that?
I guess, yeah, whether there's regulation within the VNC.
I would think so. So there were these 8 cell types, and there were several other Fru and double sex, but more than half of the types I tested are not Fru and double sex positive, but innervate the wing neuropil. And when I look at the connectivity, they don't talk to each other at all, but they talk to wing motor neurons. I don't know what any of those neurons do. None of them increase song at all. But if you activate them, some of them can shut song down, but I don't think it, so I would suspect something like this would perhaps exist, but I didn't stumble upon it, if it does.
Thank you.
This will be the last question.
Great talk. Yeah, I was kind of on the similar lines, but interactions between sine and pulse. So I think I read it correctly. There was one neuron which inhibited reduced pulse and increased sine song.
2 of them, yeah.
Yeah. So does that is connectivity give you like something about this interaction between pulse and?
Yeah, for sure. So those are neurons that are necessary for pulse. And so without getting into it too much, basically, I think that those neurons essentially, I think, need to be off in order for sine song to happen. And so I think that that's controlled in part by differentially activating each feed-forward network, and also by activating the inhibitory neurons, which then in turn inhibit those neurons. Yeah, so there's, I think, pretty compelling data that we have suggesting most of these things, but it's all not completely nailed down yet.
All right, let's thank Josh again.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Aditi Mishra from Oxford University, who will talk to us about memory overshadowing. You can also use that as a band name if you need one.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. All right, so first of all, of course, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my work on memory overshadowing. And thank you all so much for staying back to listen to me and my colleague who is going to speak after me. So at the moment, and for the next 10 minutes, you could either listen to me, or like maybe some of you are doing right now, you could whisper away to your friends here. At the end of the day, if you were to listen to both these auditory stimuli, what would you remember? One of them. It's nonsense after a while, right? So this concept in which you remember only one of these 2 stimuli that you experience is referred to as memory overshadowing. It was first actually studied by, not studied by someone else, but recorded by Pavlov in 1928, for sure. And since then has been extensively discussed by all of these phenomenal past colleagues of ours, not all past, of course. All right, so let's tune into learning and memory in flies. We have heard a lot of great talks, but I just want to talk about a little bit about olfactory memory in flies in the classical conditioning protocol. So when we train flies, a small group of flies, like 100 flies, to associate an odor, octanol, with a punishment like 90-volt shock, and a second order methylcyclohexanol without any shock, and then give the flies a preference between these 2 odors, then they move away from octanol as expected towards MCH, methylcyclohexanol. This y-axis is the performance index, which indicates the proportion of flies that move away from octanol. The more negative the index, the more aversive memory there is. So in this case, you can see that there is a strong aversive memory away from octanol. For the most part, flies are actually smarter than us. So they can actually remember components of a binary mixture that is trained for them to associate with shock. So remember both these components. But I have come across a couple of instances in which when I mix ethyl butyrate in this instance with octanol, the same octanol you saw before, then I see a significant aversive memory away from ethyl butyrate towards methyl cyclohexanol, but no preference between octanol and MCH. This suggests that ethyl butyrate overshadows octanol, at least in memory expression. Now, this is also the first instance that we have uncovered of memory overshadowing in flies in the olfactory classical conditioning protocol. And as you can imagine, I was very excited to look into the mechanisms underlying it. I mentioned this amazing people here who did a lot of work and discussed a lot about memory overshadowing and it's the properties that amongst the stimuli that lead to overshadowing. There are two models that are floating about in literature right now. The first model says that overshadowing could be occurring during learning itself. That is, there is no associative strength that has been acquired for octanol. So, and hence, there is no memory for octanol. The flies just never learned that octanol is associated with shock. The second theory suggests that they have learned everything, that both these components are associated with shock. However, they only have memory for one of the components for some reason. Now, the end result looks the same, of course, right? So to distinguish between these two, Matzell, Sachman, and Milner came up with this amazing technique, which also Johannes used earlier in his postdoc. So in this technique, I'm just gonna explain this to you with the flies itself. So I trained like two groups of flies. First of all, one group to associate the binary mixture with shock and then tested the memory 1 hour later. And I saw there is significant overshadowing, as expected. In the second group, I actually reduced the associative strength of ethyl butyrate with shock by giving the flies 2 puffs of ethyl butyrate in between the training and testing. Now, this condition is not associated with shock, so it's just ethyl butyrate. And when I do this, I actually see a small but significant memory for octanol crop up. This suggested that overshadowing in flies is a retrieval error, which means they're likely learning information for both ethyl butyrate and octanol, but they're just not expressing it when I test them. So I've shown you so far 2 things. First, that ethyl butyrate overshadows octanol, and actually it overshadows methyl cyclohexanol as well, and that it is a retrieval error in flies. Of course, the big question is, how is overshadowing encoded in the mushroom body system, which is the seat of olfactory memory and learning in the flies? Right? I jumped straight into the mushroom body output neuron 11, which innervates the gamma-1 peduncle and heel region in the mushroom body, because this output neuron is required for